The assembly hall erupted in chaos as Commander Kalos stood between the Inquisitor and Myra. Guards reached for their weapons, unsure who they should be pointing them at. Officers whispered frantically to each other, trying to understand what was happening. The humans watched with wide eyes as their fate hung in the balance. Inquisitor Vex stared at Kylos with pure hatred in his eyes. No one had ever dared to challenge his authority before. No one had ever stood in his way when he was carrying out imperial justice. He raised his weapon higher and aimed it at Kalos instead of Myra, if he had to kill a commander to maintain discipline, then so be it. But before the Inquisitor could fire his weapon, something else happened. Commander Thane stepped forward and stood beside Kalos. He said that he also believed the humans should be spared. He said that killing valuable workers was wasteful and inefficient. He positioned himself so that the Inquisitor would have to shoot, threw him to reach Myra. Then Commander Vex joined them. He had never liked humans, but he respected courage when he saw it. He said that anyone brave enough to face death with such dignity deserved to live. He said that the Empire needed people with that kind of strength, not people who were easily broken. More officers began to step forward. Some came because they genuinely believed in what Myra had said. Others came because they were tired of living in fear. Still others came because they respected Commander Kalos and trusted his judgment. Soon there was a line of officers standing between the Inquisitor and his intended victims. The Inquisitor realized that he was facing a full rebellion. He could not kill all the officers without destroying the station's command structure. But he also could not allow this challenge to his authority to go unpunished. He decided to call for reinforcements from his ship and crush the rebellion with overwhelming force. But as he reached for his communication device, the humans began to move. They had been watching everything with growing amazement. They had seen their oppressors risk their lives to protect them. They had seen aliens choose compassion over cruelty. They decided that if others could be brave, then they could be brave. The humans broke free from their restraints and surrounded the Inquisitor's guards. They did not attack or try to hurt anyone. They simply stood there, forming a human wall that blocked the exits. They sang songs from their homeland and held hands with each other. They showed the same quiet courage that Myra had taught them. Other humans throughout the station heard the commotion and came to see what was happening. They saw their fellow humans standing up to their oppressors. They saw alien officers defending human lives. They saw something that they had never thought possible. They saw hope becoming reality. The station's alien workers began to arrive as well. Many of them had their own reasons for hating the Empire. They had seen their own worlds conquered and their own peoples enslaved. They had been forced to work for the Empire, but they had never stopped dreaming of freedom. Now they saw a chance to make that dream come true. The Inquisitor found himself surrounded by a crowd of humans and aliens who refused to let him continue his executions. He still had his weapons and his guards, but he was vastly outnumbered. More importantly, he was facing something that weapons could not defeat. He was facing people who had chosen to stand together instead of falling apart. Commander Kalos stepped forward and spoke to the crowd. He said that they had reached a turning point. They could continue living in fear and hatred, or they could choose to build something better. He said that the Empire's way of doing things had brought nothing but pain and destruction. It was time to try a different approach. He proposed that they declare the station independent from the Empire. They would create a new government based on cooperation instead of conquest. All species would be treated with respect and dignity. No one would be enslaved or oppressed. Everyone would have a voice in how their community was run. The crowd cheered at his words. The humans cried tears of joy as they realized they might finally be free. The alien workers embraced each other as they thought about. The morning sun shone bright over the Galactic Military Academy as 5 cadets prepared for what should have been a simple training mission. Each cadet wore the silver uniform that marked them as the best students in their class. Each one came from a different planet, and each one had skills that made other students jealous. Hyun Woo stood quietly at the back of the group, checking his basic equipment one more time. He was human, which meant he was considered the weakest member of the team. The other cadets barely looked at him as they talked about their advanced abilities. Humans were new to the galaxy, and most aliens thought they were too simple to be real. Soldiers. Jin Dasha sparkled in the sunlight as her crystalline body caught the light. She was from Altair Prime, where people were born with bodies made of living crystal. Her skin could connect directly to any computer or machine. She could talk to spaceships and make broken engines work again just by touching them. The other cadets always asked her to fix their equipment. Because she was faster than any repair robot, Deho was twice as tall as everyone else and had 4 massive arms instead of 2. His people from the planet Korva were born warriors. Their skin was naturally thick like armor, and they could lift heavy objects that would crush other beings. Deho had never lost a fight in his life. Other students were afraid to even practice combat with him because he was so strong. So Young looked normal on the outside, but her mind was special. She came from Zephyr, where people could read thoughts and speak without words. She could process thousands of pieces of information at the same time. During written tests, she would finish in minutes while others needed hours. Her telepathic abilities made her the perfect scout and strategist. Wujin was the most interesting of all. He was a metamorph from the planet Flux. His body could change into any shape he wanted. He could grow wings to fly or gills to swim underwater. He could make his skin hard like rock or soft like water. The academy instructors said he was the most adaptable student they had ever seen. The mission briefing was simple. They would be dropped onto planet Kepler 442B for a navigation exercise. The planet had forests and rivers, but no dangerous animals. They had to find 3 marked waypoints and reach the extraction zone within 2 days. Emergency supplies were hidden at each waypoint. If something went wrong, they had communication devices and an emergency beacon. The transport ship pilot was a friendly Corven who joked with the cadets as they flew toward the planet. He told them this was the easiest training mission in the academy. Students called it a vacation because it was so simple. Even the weakest cadets had never failed this exercise. As they approached the planet, Hyun Woo looked out the window at the green forest below. Something felt wrong, but he could not explain what. The other cadets were laughing and making bets about who would reach the first waypoint fastest. They acted like this was a game instead of a military exercise. The landing pod was designed to automatically navigate to the correct drop zone. Jin connected her crystalline fingers to the navigation system to monitor their descent. Everything looked normal on the screens. The pod was following the planned route and would land exactly where it was supposed to. Then the navigation system started making strange noises. Jinna frowned as her connection to the computers became fuzzy. The screens flickered and showed confusing numbers. The pod began to shake and spin as it fell through the atmosphere. The pilot tried to take manual control, but the steering was not responding. Deho used his 4 arms to grab onto the safety rails and shouted for everyone to hold on tight. So Young tried to use her telepathic abilities to sense what was happening, but she felt a strange buzzing in her mind. Wujin started shifting between different forms as his body automatically tried to find a shape that could survive a crash. The pod hit the treetops hard and bounced between massive tree trunks. Metal scraped against bark as they crashed through branches. The impact threw everyone around inside the pod like toys in a shaken box. Emergency lights flashed red as alarms screamed warnings about hull damage and system failures. When the pod finally stopped moving, everyone was bruised and shaken. The door would not open automatically, so Deho had to force it with his warrior strength. They stumbled out into a thick jungle that looked nothing like the planned drop zone. Instead of an open field with marked paths, they were surrounded by massive trees and thick vines. Their equipment was scattered everywhere. Communication devices were broken and sparking. Food supplies had spilled out of torn containers. The emergency beacon was cracked and making weak beeping sounds. Jinna tried to connect to the remaining electronics, but her crystal body interfaces were damaged from the crash. The jungle was hot and humid. Strange insects buzzed around them, and unfamiliar bird sounds came from high in the trees. This was not the safe training area they had studied. The maps they had memorized were useless here. None of them recognized any landmarks or knew which direction led to safety. Daeho noticed cracks in his natural armor that had never been there before. The impact had damaged his supposedly indestructible body. So Young held her head in her hands as telepathic static filled her mind. She could not read anyone's thoughts or sense their emotions. Wu Jin kept shifting between forms, without meaning to as his body reacted to the stress. An unfamiliar environment. The carefully planned team structure fell apart immediately. Each cadet had been trained to be the best in their specialty, but now their specialties were not working. They began to argue about what to do next. Jina insisted they should try to repair the communication equipment first. Daeho wanted to scout the area for threats. So Young suggested they should analyze their situation. Logically, before making any decisions, the argument got louder as each cadet insisted their approach was best. They had been taught that their species were naturally superior to others in different ways. Now they were trying to prove who should be the leader by talking about their advanced abilities and complex training, while his teammates debated advanced survival theories and argued about proper chain of command. Hyun-woo walked away from the group. He looked up at the massive trees surrounding them and chose the tallest one he could see. Without saying anything to the others, he started climbing. The other cadets were too busy arguing to notice what the human was doing. They were focused on their broken equipment and damaged abilities. None of them thought to look up at the simple solution that was right above their heads. Hyun-woo climbed steadily upward using the basic skills he had learned as a child on Earth. He did not need advanced technology or special abilities. He just needed strong hands and the willingness to go higher than anyone else was thinking to look. The Starlight Runner moved through the planet killer internal structure like a dancer performing on a stage of death. Somin had become one with the ship, her hands moving across the controls without conscious thought as she guided them through passages that seemed impossible to navigate. The maintenance tunnels were barely wider than their vessel, and one wrong move would send them crashing into the alien metal wall. Shai-jin was performing miracles in the engine room, keeping the power systems stable while they flew through the most demanding course any human ship had ever attempted. The engines were running so hot that the metal was beginning to glow, but she had learned every trick for extracting maximum performance from the systems during her 15 years of engineering experience. The ship rolled and twisted through the tunnel system with movements that would have been impossible for larger vessels. Taehyun was amazed at how the Corvani ships struggled to follow their path. Several of the alien vessels had already given up the chase because they simply could not fit through the passages that the human ship was using. Captain, I am noticing something important about the alien ship designs, Taehyun said as he studied the tactical display. The Corvani vessels are built for straight-line attacks and maximum firepower, but they cannot make the quick turns that we are making. Their ships are too big and too heavy for this kind of flying. Dong-wook had noticed the same thing. The human ship was built with a completely different philosophy than the alien vessels. Where the Corvani ships prioritized armor and weapons, the Starlight Runner was designed for speed and maneuverability. This difference was keeping them alive in the deadly maze of the weapon structure. Asomin discovered that she could use the alien ship limitations against them. When the pursuing vessels tried to follow her through tight turns, she would lead them directly into structural elements of the weapon itself. 2 Corvani ships had already crashed into support beams while trying to match her flight path. The crashes were causing damage to the planet killer structure. Small explosions and system failures were occurring throughout the weapon as the alien ships destroyed their own construction trying to catch the human vessel. The crew realized that their presence was not just gathering intelligence but actually degrading the weapon capabilities. We are causing significant damage to their systems, Captain Hyjin reported from her engineering station. The energy readings from the weapon are becoming unstable every time one of their ships crashes into the structure. It damages critical components. As they flew deeper into the weapon interior, the crew began intercepting more Corvani communications. The alien transmissions revealed that the planet killer firing sequence was scheduled to begin in just a few hours. The weapon would target New Seoul first, followed by Bizan Prime and then the other major human colonist Hyan, was working frantically to decode more of the alien messages. What he discovered made the situation even more urgent. The Corvani command believed that destroying the major colonies would end human resistance and force Earth to surrender. The aliens were planning to use the weapon to win the entire war with just a few shots. The ship entered a larger chamber within the weapon structure, and So-Min had to dodge between massive energy conduits that carried power to the weapon systems. The conduits were as wide as buildings, and they pulsed with energy that made the ship sensors go crazy. Every few seconds, bolts of electricity would jump between the conduits, creating deadly barriers that had to be avoided. Ijin noticed that the energy patterns in the conduits followed a predictable rhythm. There were brief moments when the power flow decreased and the electrical barriers disappeared. If So-Min could time their flight perfectly, they could use these gaps to move through the chamber safely. The navigation officer studied the energy patterns for several minutes. Before she felt confident enough to attempt the passage, the ship accelerated toward the conduit field and then began a complex dance between the energy barriers. So-Min would wait for the power to decrease, then dart through the gap before the electricity returned. The maneuver required perfect timing and incredible skill. One mistake would send them flying into a conduit carrying enough power to vaporize their entire ship. But So-Min had become something more than just a pilot. During their flight through the weapon, she had developed an almost supernatural ability to read the alien technology and predict its behavior. Behind them, the remaining Corvani ships were trying to follow, but they were having much more difficulty with the energy barriers. Their larger size made them easier targets for the electrical discharges, and 2 more alien vessels were destroyed when they mistimed their approach to the conduit field. The ship sensors were now detecting the weapon central core. Just ahead of them, the core was housed in a massive spherical chamber that was heavily defended by automated systems. The crew could see weapons turrets and missile pods covering every approach to the core and energy barriers that would stop most attacks. Hyan studied the defensive systems and realized that they were designed to stop large assault forces, not a single small ship. The automated defenses were programmed to track multiple targets and coordinate massive attacks, but they seemed less effective against a lone vessel using unpredictable flight patterns. Captain, I think we might be able to get through their defenses if we can maintain our current flying style. The automated systems are designed for fleet battles, not for dealing with a single ship that moves like we do. So-Min was already analyzing the defensive patterns and looking for weaknesses in their coverage. She could see gaps in the weapon coverage and brief moments when the automated systems would be reloading or repositioning. The key would be to time their approach perfectly and never give the defenses a stable target. To lock onto the crew prepared for the most dangerous part of their mission as they approached the entrance to the core chamber. The ship would need to fly through multiple layers of defenses while maintaining the speed and agility that had kept them alive. The margin for error was essentially zero, and any mistake would mean instant destruction. Dong-wook looked at his crew and saw determination mixed with fear in their faces. They all knew that they were about to attempt something that had never been done before. No human ship had ever penetrated this deeply into enemy territory and survived. But they also knew that the fate of billions of people depended on their success. The automated defenses began tracking their approach, and the crew could see weapon systems powering up throughout the core chamber. The next few minutes would determine whether they could reach the weapon heart, or whether they would join the growing list of casualties in the space around the planet. Killer So-Min took a deep breath and began the final approach to the core chamber as the ship danced through the deadliest gauntlet ever created. The entrance to the core chamber was a nightmare of overlapping weapon systems that created a killing field designed to stop any possible attack. The automated defenses included laser grids that could slice through armor missile pods that fired, seeking projectiles, and energy barriers that would disintegrate anything that touched them. The Corvani had spent years perfecting these systems to protect their ultimate weapon. Captain Dong-wook made the most important decision of his career as he looked at the defensive systems ahead of them. We are going to transmit everything we have learned to Human Command before we enter that chamber. If we do not survive, at least our people will know what they are facing. Hyan sent a compressed Data burst toward human space containing all of their sensor readings and intelligence about the planet killer weapon. The transmission would take several hours to reach the nearest human outpost, but it would give their forces crucial information about the alien threat. The crew knew that this might be their final message to the outside world, but they were determined to complete their mission. Somin studied the defensive patterns one more time, looking for any weakness that might allow them to survive the passage. The automated systems were incredibly sophisticated, but they were still machines that followed predictable programs. She found what she was looking for. The defensive systems were designed to stop large groups of attacking ships by creating overlapping fields of fire, but this also meant that the weapons had to coordinate their attacks carefully to avoid hitting each other. There were brief moments when parts of the defensive grid would shut down to allow other weapons to fire. These gaps in the coverage lasted only milliseconds, but they were enough for a small, fast ship to slip through if the timing was perfect. Somin would need to fly through the killing field like threading a needle while moving at maximum speed. The slightest mistake would mean instant destruction. The ship accelerated toward the core chamber entrance and immediately came under attack from every direction. Laser beams tried to slice through their hull while missiles exploded around them, creating clouds of shrapnel. The energy barriers crackled with power that could vaporize their entire vessel in seconds. Somin began the most incredible display of piloting skill that any human had ever attempted. She rolled the ship through gaps in the laser grid that were barely wider than their hull. She dove under missile barrages and climbed over energy barriers with movements that seemed to defy physics. Shijin was working frantically to keep the ship systems operational as they took damage from near misses. The hull was heating up from laser strikes that passed just centimeters from their armor. The shields were overloading from energy discharges, and several secondary systems had already failed. The ship spun through the defensive maze like a dancer performing in a thunderstorm. Somin was no longer thinking consciously about her actions. She had become one with the ship, moving by instinct and split-second reactions that saved them from destruction dozens of times. Taehyun was timing the defensive systems and calling out warnings to help Somin navigate through the attacks. Missile pod reloading in 3 seconds, energy barrier cycling down in 2 seconds. Laser grid shifting pattern. Now the coordination between the crew members was perfect, with each person contributing their specialized skills to keep the ship alive. Dongwook was coordinating their efforts while monitoring the overall situation. Hyjin was managing the ship systems while keeping the engines running at maximum power. They were halfway through the killing field when the ship took its first serious hit. A missile exploded close enough to their port side to cause a hull breach. The crew could hear the atmosphere rushing out through the damaged section, but the emergency systems sealed the breach before they lost too much pressure. The ship systems were beginning to fail under the incredible stress of the flight. Several control panels were sparking and smoking, and the main computer was having trouble processing all the sensor data from the defensive systems. The crew was pushing everything beyond its design limit. Somin could see the end of the killing field ahead of them, but she knew that the final approach would be the most dangerous. The defensive systems were most concentrated near the core chamber entrance, where multiple weapon types created an almost solid wall of destruction. She made a decision that surprised everyone on the bridge, including herself. Instead of trying to find gaps in the final defensive layer, she would fly directly through the center of the most concentrated firepower. The weapons were designed to track targets that tried to avoid them, but they might not be able to adjust quickly enough to hit something that flew straight at them. The ship accelerated directly toward the most dangerous part of the killing field, with every weapon system firing at them. Simultaneously, the crew held their breath as laser beams, energy barriers, and missile explosions created a wall of destruction that seemed impossible to survive, but Somin had calculated correctly. The defensive systems were programmed to lead their targets and predict evasive maneuvers when the ship flew directly through the center of their fire pattern. The weapons could not adjust their aim quickly enough. The ship passed through the killing field in a straight line while the defenses fired at where they thought it would. Beatty Starlight Runner emerged from the Defensive maze badly damaged but still functional. The crew looked at each other in amazement as they realized they had just accomplished something that should have been impossible. They had flown through the most sophisticated defensive system ever created and lived to tell about it. Ahead of them lay the core chamber, a vast spherical space that contained the heart of the planet-killer weapon. The chamber was so large that their sensors could barely detect the far walls. The core itself was a captured star held in place by gravitational manipulators and surrounded by control systems that regulated its power output. The crew realized they were looking at the most terrible weapon ever created. The aliens had literally imprisoned a star and were using its nuclear fire to power their planet-destroying device. The energy output was beyond anything they had ever imagined, and they could feel the heat even through their damaged shields. But they had made it to the heart of the weapon, and now they had to figure out how to destroy it before it could fire on the human colonies. The clock was ticking and millions of lives hung in the balance. Hyun was already studying the core systems, looking for vulnerabilities, while Hyjin worked to repair the ship damage they had sustained during their flight through the killing field. The crew prepared for the final phase of their impossible mission. The core chamber was a sight that would haunt the crew for the rest of their lives. The captured star burned at the center of the vast spherical space held in place by massive gravitational manipulators that bent space itself around the stellar fire. The star was smaller than a normal sun, but its nuclear flames still produced unimaginable amounts of energy that fed the planet killer weapon. Captain Dongwook stared at the alien technology in horror and amazement. The Corvani had actually captured a star and turned it into a weapon power source. This was beyond anything that human science had achieved, and it explained how the planet killer could generate enough energy to crack worlds, and half the gravitational manipulators were enormous machines that surrounded the star like the petals of a deadly flower. Each manipulator was larger than most space stations, and they worked together to contain the stellar fire and direct its energy into the weapon systems. The entire chamber hummed with power that made their instruments struggle to function. Hyun was preparing their antimatter warheads for a direct strike on the gravitational containment field. If they could destroy the manipulators, the artificial star would be released from its prison and would explode in a supernova that would destroy the entire planet-killer weapon. Captain, if we attack the containment field, we will not survive the explosion, he reported. The energy release will destroy everything within several light minutes of this position, but the weapon will be eliminated and Earth colonies will be safe. The crew accepted this fate without question. They had known from the beginning that this was likely a suicide mission, but they were willing to give their lives to save billions of innocent people. The human colonies had no defense against a planet-killer weapon, and someone had to stop. Iso-min was calculating the best approach vector for their final attack when her sensors detected something that changed everything. Captain, I am reading human energy signatures in the chamber. There are people down there. The crew looked at the sensor display in shock. There were hundreds of human life signs scattered throughout the core chamber, mixed in with the alien technology. The Corvani had been using human prisoners as slave labor to build and maintain their ultimate weapon. Dongwook felt sick as he realized the full horror of what they were seeing. The aliens had captured human colonists and forced them to work on the device that would destroy their own worlds. The prisoners were trapped in the core chamber with no way to escape and no knowledge that their families and friends were about to be murdered by the weapon they were forced to maintain. We cannot destroy the core with our people still trapped down there, So-min said quietly. We have to find another way. The crew studied the chamber layout, looking for any way to rescue the prisoners while still stopping the weapon. The task seemed impossible. The human captives were scattered throughout the chamber, working on different parts of the core systems, and there was no way to evacuate them all before the weapon Fred Hyun discovered something important in the alien control systems. Captain, the gravitational manipulators can be shut down in sequence instead of all at once. If we target the right control nodes, we can create a controlled collapse of the containment field. This would give them a narrow window of opportunity. The star would begin to destabilize, but it would take several minutes to reach critical mass. If they could evacuate the prisoners during that time, they might be able to save everyone and still destroy the weapon. The plan was even more dangerous than their original suicide mission. They would need to fly through the core chamber while dodging the gravitational effects of the destabilizing star, rescue hundreds of prisoners, and escape before the stellar explosion destroyed everything. He-Jin was already working on modifications to their ship systems. We can extend the cargo bay doors and use the emergency pods to evacuate the prisoners, but we will need to make multiple trips. The ship cannot carry everyone at once. So-min studied the gravitational patterns around the manipulators and realized that the destabilizing star would create increasingly dangerous conditions in the chamber. The artificial gravity would become unstable and energy discharges would make flying more difficult. With each passing minute, the crew began their rescue mission by targeting the first gravitational manipulator. Taehyun fired precisely aimed shots at the control nodes while So-min kept the ship steady despite the incredible gravitational forces. The manipulator shut down and the star began to shift slightly in its containment field. The first group of human prisoners was working on a maintenance platform near the manipulator. The crew could see their faces through the viewing ports. As they realized that rescue had finally arrived, the prisoners had been trapped for months or years, and many of them had given up hope of ever seeing their families again. So-min brought the ship alongside the platform and extended the cargo bay doors. The prisoners rushed aboard with tears streaming down their faces as they saw their rescuers. Emergency pods were launched to collect prisoners from other platforms while the crew worked frantically to evacuate everyone. The second manipulator was shut down and the star began to burn more violently. The gravitational field was becoming unstable and the ship was being pulled in different directions by conflicting forces. Hyjin was fighting to keep the engines stable while the very fabric of space was being twisted around them. More prisoners were rescued from platforms throughout the chamber, but the crew could see that time was running out. The star was beginning to expand and its surface was erupting with solar flares that sent waves of radiation through the chamber. The temperature was rising, and the ship systems were being affected by the stellar emissions. The third manipulator was the most dangerous to attack because it was closest to the star. The gravitational forces were so strong that the ship was being stretched and compressed by tidal effects. The crew could feel the artificial gravity fluctuating as they approached the target. Taehyun managed to destroy the control nodes, despite the difficult conditions, and the star immediately began to lose its containment. The stellar fire was expanding and the nuclear reactions were becoming unstable. The crew had perhaps 10 minutes before the star would explode. The final groups of prisoners were scattered on platforms throughout the chamber, and some of them were trapped by the changing gravitational conditions. Emergency pods were launched to reach the most distant captives while So-min flew the ship through increasingly dangerous conditions. The crew could see Admiral Zektar's fleet approaching the chamber entrance. The alien commander had realized what was happening and was bringing his ships to stop the rescue mission. The Corvani could not allow the humans to escape with knowledge of the weapon, and they would rather die than let their ultimate weapon be destroyed. The race was on to evacuate the remaining prisoners before the star exploded or the alien fleet arrived. The crew pushed themselves and their ship to the absolute limit as they fought to save every human life in the chamber, while the heart of the planet-killer weapon burned out of control around them. The destabilizing star was growing brighter and more violent with each passing second. The nuclear reactions were spiraling out of control and the core chamber was being filled with deadly radiation that made the ship sensors scream warnings. The crew had managed to rescue most of the human prisoners, but there were still dozens of people trapped on distant platforms. Captain Dong-wook watched the tactical display as Admiral Zektar's fleet entered the chamber the alien commander had brought his remaining ships for a final confrontation, even though he knew the exploding star would destroy them all. The Corvani admiral would rather die than allow the humans to escape with their prisoners, and Intelligence So-min was performing the most difficult flying of her career as she guided the ship through the chaotic gravitational fields around the dying star. The artificial gravity was pulling them in multiple directions at once, and the ship hull was groaning under stresses that threatened to tear it apart. The emergency pods were racing to collect the last groups of prisoners, while Taehyun provided covering fire against the approaching Corvani ships. The alien vessels were struggling with the same gravitational problems that were affecting the human ship, but they were still closing in on the evacuation effort. The Jin was monitoring the star collapse and reporting countdown. Estimates to the crew: we have approximately 4 minutes before the star reaches critical mass, Captain. The explosion will be visible from the next star system. The ship collected another group of prisoners from a platform that was being pulled toward the expanding star. The human captives were exhausted and traumatized from their months of forced labor, but they were crying with joy as they realized they were finally free. Admiral Zektar was broadcasting surrender demands to the human ship, but Dongwook ignored the alien commander. The Corvani had lost the right to negotiate when they began building weapons designed to commit genocide. The crew would complete their mission regardless of the consequences. More emergency pods returned with prisoners. Just as the first Corvani ships came within weapon range, the alien vessels opened fire, but their accuracy was terrible due to the gravitational distortions. The energy beams were bent and twisted by the dying star gravity field. So Min realized that she could use the gravitational chaos to her advantage. The star was creating a maze of distorted space that would confuse enemy targeting systems. She began flying the ship through the most dangerous areas, where the gravity was strongest, knowing that the alien ships would have even more trouble following. The rescue operation was nearly complete, but the final group of prisoners was trapped on a platform that was being pulled directly toward the star. The emergency pod sent to collect them was struggling against the gravitational pull and would not reach them in time. Captain, I am going to fly the ship directly to that platform, So Min announced. It is the only way to save them. The maneuver was incredibly dangerous because it would take them closer to the star than any ship was designed to go. The hull would be exposed to temperatures and radiation that could melt their armor, but it was the only way to save the last prisoner. The ship dove toward the star with its engines screaming at maximum power. The hull began to glow from the stellar radiation and several systems failed from the heat, but they reached the platform just as it was about to be consumed by the expanding star. The final prisoners rushed aboard just as the platform was torn apart by tidal forces. The ship immediately turned away from the star and began its escape from the core chamber. The crew could see that the star was reaching its final moments and the explosion would happen within minutes. The Corvani fleet was between them and the chamber exit, but Admiral Zektar's ships were also struggling with the gravitational chaos. Several alien vessels had been pulled too close to the star and were being destroyed by the radiation. The remaining ships were trying to position themselves to block the human escape. So Min made one final impossible decision that would save them all. Instead of trying to fight through the alien fleet, she would use the star explosion itself to propel them to safety. The expanding energy wave would destroy everything in the chamber, but it would also create a massive gravitational pulse that could catapult them away from the weapon. The ship and its convoy of emergency pods positioned themselves behind the largest piece of debris they could find. As the star reached critical mass, the crew and rescued prisoners braced themselves for the most violent ride of their lives. The star exploded with the force of a supernova, and the entire planet-killer weapon was consumed in nuclear fire. The explosion was so bright that it could be seen from neighboring star systems and so powerful that it created a new star that would burn for millions of years. The gravitational wave from the explosion caught the human ships and hurled them away from the destruction at incredible speed. The crew was pressed into their seats by forces that threatened to crush them, but the ship held together and carried them to safety. Behind them, the massive alien weapon was completely destroyed along with Admiral Zektar's entire fleet. The threat to human civilization had been eliminated by the courage and skill of one small ship and its crew. The war would continue, but the Corvani had lost their ultimate weapon. The rescued prisoners were reunited with their families when the ship returned to human space. The intelligence gathered during the mission helped human forces locate and destroy other alien weapons before they could be completed. The tide of the war turned in humanity favor. Captain Dongwook and his crew became legends throughout human space. They were honored not for their firepower or advanced technology, but for their ability to dance through the impossible and find hope in the darkest places. Their small ship had changed the fate of entire civilizations. The new star that had been created from the planet-killer explosion became known as the Freedom star, and it served as a reminder that even the smallest light can shine in the darkness. When human children looked up at the night sky, they could see the star and remember that courage and determination could overcome any obstacle. The crew of the Starlight Runner continued their service, but they were forever changed by their experience. They had seen the worst that the universe could offer, but they had also seen the best of human nature. The bonds formed during their impossible mission would last for the rest of their lives. Years later, when the war was finally over and peace had returned to the galaxy, the crew would gather each year to remember their fallen enemies and celebrate the lives they had saved. Planet Killer was gone, but the memory of their dance through the darkness would live forever.